As we've been mentioning before, we have two more guests. Professor João Pedro Costa and Dr. Jorge Portugal, which I'll introduce now and then we can continue. So Professor João Pedro Costa is an architect with a master's in contemporary architectonic culture from the University of Lisbon. He has a PhD in urbanism from the Technical University of Catalonia in Barcelona. He did a postdoc in architecture and urbanism also at Lisbon, and in 2012 he got his habilitation to full professorship in urbanism at Lisbon as well. He's currently many things. One of them, he's an associate professor of urbanism at the Faculty of Architecture, a member of the Direction Board of Research Center of Architecture, Urbanism and Design. He's a visiting professor at the Superior Institute of Agronomy. He's published a book on climate change adaptation, urban planning. From 2012 to 2014 was an advisor and head of the cabinet for the Portuguese Secretary of State of Spatial Planning. And since 2017, Professor Costa is a councilman of the opposition in the Lisbon City Council. Many things, very productive and fruitful career. And we also will have, sorry, I need to get my notes. Dr. Jorge Portugal, that since 2016 acts as a general manager of Cotec Portugal, the leading business network for promoting technology and innovation. Dr. Portugal has an MBA from Nova School Business and Economics, a PhD in Mechanical Engineering from Instituto Superior Técnico on numerical prediction of geophysical stratified flows. Served for 10 years as an advisor on innovation, entrepreneurship, and competitiveness for the President of Portugal, and previously as an advisor for the Portuguese government on innovation in public services. Has accumulated extensive corporate management experience in innovation projects in retail, banking, and information technology sectors. Welcome you both. You have not had the opportunity to speak up your minds. If we'll give you now some minutes to do so, and perhaps I would kick off with one question. Maybe Dr. Jorge, one of my questions would be, if we think about the corporate sector, what would be the major plan that this particular sector has to deal with the different consequences of the climate change, such as, for example, the greenhouse gas emissions, or the water consumption, or even the 3 Rs policies that are super intricate with the corporate sector.
Thank you for having me.
You will need to share a microphone.
Thank you for having me here. Good evening. It's interesting to see that half of the room just left when we moved to the business discussion. So probably discussing of the scientific content of this debate may be more attractive. But at the end of the day, it's on the business arena where everything will, in economy, everything will be just will be the proof. Will be taking action, and action will be taken. So I think that first of all, it's important to understand what is the nature of the problem. The nature of the problem is not only to reduce carbon emissions and to be neutral in carbon, CO2. The neutral, I will add to this carbon neutrality. I will add two more challenges that has to be faced at the same time. The first will be the absolute decoupling of the economy. So we'll have to decouple the increasing wealth creation for people, and we'll have in 2050 more 2 billion people in the planet to feed, and we'll achieve, or we'll expect to have the same level of comfort that we do at the Western societies. So absolute decoupling of dematerialization of economy, it's one of the biggest challenges as well. And as well, this brings to the resource revolution. So we have to weaken our need for extraction of resources. And this is the nature of the problem that the business has to face in the next, I would say, 20, 30 years. And someone said that this has been my previous that has to be a very fast, rapid decarbonization. Indeed, we'll need to do this, and Portugal assumed the commitment to be neutral in carbon in 20 years. So 20 years is nothing in business terms. It's tomorrow. And for a small economy, even for Europe, the nature of the investments that have to be done in order to promote the necessary level of knowledge, scientific knowledge, technology, and bringing that technology to market in terms of being able to be applied in safe terms, in practical terms, in terms that the market accepts and value, I would say it's an incredible task. I would say it's really incredible task. We admire the political aspiration, and all the debate has been rising. And I remember my first 2 decades of professional activity. I have been a researcher at IST and doing subgrid modeling, so short, near, distance. So on that time, we were thinking that we were just helping global climate change global climate models, in order to be more precise. Actually, we come to the conclusion now, still we have the problem of the uncertainty of the subgrid model. So still it's a challenge. I'd be happy to, 30 years after, we still have, if I was I would be in the job, in research job, I would have a job to do it in terms of research, a research problem. But coming back to the problem, we have to turn our economy, our industrial model, has to be changed. And we look at the classic sustainability concept, like it's about being competitiveness of the business, to be climate friendly, so in terms of resources and emissions, all that, but also socially sustainable in terms of jobs, because if there is no jobs, there will be no market, no people will be to buy products, there will be no economy, so it's the problem will be solved.
Can I just make a small comment?
Yeah.
How, following just upon what you're saying, how does this match a change in mentality that is now being proposed, which is let's consume less?
Yeah.
So less consumption, what's going to happen to the corporate side of things that still needs to be producing and making all these investments to become greener and more environmentally friendly, whereas the mentality that we are trying to create and educate is that we don't need to consume as much?
I think that it's no one. If I rise, if you please raise hands for those of you that are willing to not to use the level of comfort and convenience that you had used to just now. Who is willing to be back to the cave, and not using the convenience of, for instance, plastic, so packaging, modern packaging, transport, ubiquitous transport, all that? Who is willing to be back to the cave? And by the way, not having the convenience of the industrial foods, value chain, all that. Who will be able to do that? Our ministry, by the way, can you raise the hand? Will be? Okay, just 1, 2, 3.
Maybe not to cave time.
By the way, not to cave.
Okay.
But by the way, I use the word cave because our Minister of Environment, in a recent conference that we organized, he said that he was not willing to live back to the cave. So, but he would be willing to decrease the level of emissions, his personal emissions, his personal fingerprint. So, but the problem for business is that there is no incentives to internalize in the business the waste that the value chain is producing, and second, to internalize all the risks and the cost of life cycle of the products and the goods once they are produced. So that is probably the huge challenge business will face. That is, there is no economic incentive now in order that a company, when they produce, for instance, a company that manufactures these products, not to go through the rapid cycle of replacement and sell and again and sell and sell and sell and consume and deploy and through to the waste landfill. And there, in order to internalize what is the cost of the life cycle and end of life of the product, and the cost of the waste that is producing across across the production line and the consumption line. So that is the problem. One of the highest problems is the extended responsibility of the producer. Only a few industries in the world, and especially in Portugal, and particularly in Portugal and Europe, they have fully internalized this kind of costs. So they are, most of all, they are external. They are, the risk is up to the consumer, or the risk is up to no one knows who. So when you go to the landfill, you know that the thing is there. So basically, this is the second, I think, challenge for business is to invest enough in science and technology. So currently, we have the front-runners countries in Europe invest 3% in science, 3.5. We in Portugal, we invest 1.2% of GDP, and companies only half of that. So we need to increase much higher what is currently the level of investment in science and technology. Otherwise, we cannot do what is really the challenge, is to increase what we call the value per weight of the materials. What I mean value per weight is how much is the value for each kilogram of materials. It's the only way to reduce the demand for natural resources. And I can give you an example, just to note. So, for instance, in a car, the value per weight is 20 euros per kilogram. And a blade for doing your hygiene, it's basically something from the industrial economy. It's about 500 euros per kilogram. So, but if you look at the memory stick, it's about 8 euros per gram. Or an enzyme that produces molecules, 10 million euros per gram. So it's basically something we can call for what we call a performance economy, which is you just take a little bit of material and that gets a lot of value and a lot of performance in terms of your product and your good. So that's this kind of evolution that we need in terms, and only science and technology may bring into the business. So, but the point is, how can we invest, how the business can invest so much money that is required for achieving this? And that is really the problem, because when you think about, for instance, this new industrial policy of Europe about batteries, who is going to win value? Who is going to? And we look to the map of the investment in Europe, will be Central Europe. It will be Central Europe. Southern countries will be only, okay, will be extracting some raw material, but will be not involved in the core activities for bringing the value to the market. And so the problem is basically someone said that, okay, this is a matter of disbelief. People and the business or political decision makers, they disbelieve in climate change. I don't believe they disbelieve. This is pretty much appealing and pretty much, the problem is how can business and country economies adapt so fast? And the point is, if there is no global agreement about a playing level field between economies, you'll end up in some economies that will be just good intentions. There will be just have overload of costs in terms to comply with goals. And while other economies and other companies that will compete in the global market won't be doing that, and will be dumping not only in terms of social, not only in terms of environment terms, but also in terms in jobs or in work conditions and whatever. So sustainability is not about only in the environment. I just end with a comment of the chief executive of H&M, the apparel chain. And he was questioned, I think it was in a Bloomberg interview, and he was questioned, oh, you sir, you are very, very nasty, your company very nasty about the environment and about sustainability, because you are in the business of fast fashion. So what you can tell about that? He said, okay, no problem. We'll just let the fast fashion a little bit more slower, more sustainable. But the point is, a lot of people will get out of their jobs, they will lose their jobs if we do that change too fast, because they won't be able to adapt. And by the way, we can discuss what we have to take into account what the digital technology will do, automation will do in terms of, one way to solve the problem, but in another way, in order that letting time to people to adapt to change. And I think adaptation and time scales for change will be crucial, and playing level field of the change will be also crucial in terms of people, decision makers, political decision makers, but business leaders accept that we have a problem, Houston. We have to work together to solve it.
Thank you. Oh no, you go ahead. You know. I will now give word to Professor Costa, and I think more or less on the same line of thought is being a representative of the City Council and a member of society, as we are all, but with potentially a bit more knowledge in terms of urbanism, for example. What are the major problems that we are facing, and in particular, in the case of Lisbon, what would be the measures that are undergoing or being taken in order to tackle the consequences of climate change, and at the same time, if we shouldn't be focusing more on fighting the climate change rather than adapting to the climate change?
Thank you very
much. But then you can take it away and, you know.
Okay. Thank you very much. I would like firstly to give a very warmful or cold, I don't know, it's the best adjective today, a compliment to Ipacia and this group of Italian researchers that is doing a fantastic job, and give a special compliment to Francisca Dalcin, which is a PhD student, an Italian PhD student at our University of Lisbon. I will try to bring the discussion. I was thinking, how can I contribute to this discussion? And I was thinking in three major bullets, three major points where I think the discussion would be interesting. I will try to get to the three of them. Two as academic and one as politician. I will leave the politician part to the last comment. The first one is we had three fantastic presentations, and the conclusion, I think all of the audience, is what's next. And now, what shall we do? I think we all were convinced about the scientific demonstration of what's happening. So there's no longer doubt about the scientific knowledge we have about the planet, about what's happening, and about the scenarios that are on the table. And I like to emphasize this first word, the scenarios that are on the table, which means we still have a goal, we still have an opportunity to do something and to point out more in the direction of some scenarios and to get away from other scenarios. And because it brings the action to ourselves as society in terms of what's going to happen to the future. The first message I would like to bring to the discussion, it's a non-political correct message, so it's the academic that is saying, it's not about what's happening in Madrid with the leaders of the world. It's not the leader of Russia, China, United States. They are not the deciding persons. Because they will do what the voters telling them to do. They will do what the economy allows them to do. They will do what technology allows to do. And at the end of the world, at the end of the day, I think people, all of us, I was listening to the three presentations. I think all of you have a flight to catch now. Yes? Not a sailboat, like Greta did. Yes? And why don't you take the sailboat? Because it's inefficient. But you know that it would be better to take a sailboat. So it means that there's a step we need to give in order to go on taking a flight. No one wants to no longer fly in the world. We want to fly more and more. People have the right to fly, to visit the other cities, to make tourism, to make short break, to make holidays, to work. But we need to have planes without emission of CO2. We don't have the technology yet. And so the issue is about allowing the economy and allowing universities and to invest in the improvement of technology, because I think that's the only moment when the politicians will be able to change the shift. Otherwise, I think it's a lot of hypocrisy, I would say, in this discussion, because we all have very large objectives, preferably to 2050 or 2100, where none of us will be longer in the place where we are sitting. And especially politics, it's very easy to say, I will present a goal to 2050, because no politic will be seated in the same seat at that time. And it's very easy to make, let's be capital of this, capital of that, let's make very small measures with a huge mediatic projection, but not addressing the major issues. And I think in terms of mitigation, the major issue is economy and technology. And that's where all of us as a society should put our major investment, allowing all of us to maintain our lifestyles, our citizens living in Africa or in poor developed countries, to improve the quality of life and to achieve our quality of life. They have the right to do it. And so you cannot say you cannot develop yourself because you are polluting.
No, but they can use
so you
the
cannot go to
technology.
India, you cannot go to the BRICS and ask you cannot emit. Because they have the right to try to improve the quality of life. They are human beings like ourselves.
But they can use the knowledge from other
the discussion,
countries.
the real goal of the discussion is, in my belief, in the economy and technology, and that's where we should put our goal. Second aspect of the discussion is about mitigation. And what the reality has shown us, especially about the Katrina event in the United States, is that local communities, it's not that they do not believe in mitigation, but they are alert. They observe what's happening around them, and they are moving toward an adaptation agenda. It's no longer a top-down agenda like mitigation, being the top United Nations, or a young 16-year-old young girl that enters in our TV saying what we should do. It's a top-down approach, mitigation. The adaptation agenda is a bottom-up approach. It's local inhabitants, cities, regions that confronted with what's happening around the world, what's happening in the surroundings of their community, decide to take action. And that's a non-political correct in terms of international policy approach, because it means you have to accept that mitigation is failing to invest in adaptation. I would say you can say it is a plan B once mitigation might not have the results we wanted to achieve in a certain period of time. And in mitigation, that's a huge agenda to grow, and there's an enormous amount of challenges to be addressed by our communities. We have to learn how to work and how to link disciplines that until very recently didn't spoke with each other. You have to put architects, spatial planners, geographers speaking with climate scientists and creating channels of information to float in both directions. We have to construct an ethic of climate change. Because when you have, imagine any of you seated on a city council having to decide if you allowed or do not allowed to have a building of housing in front of this Champalimaud Foundation. That you know that in some scenarios, in 2100, it might be flooded. None of us will be living in 2100. So shall we allow or shall we not allow to have an housing block on an area that might be flooded in some scenarios in 2100? We don't know how to deal with this in terms of technical knowledge, in terms of civil responsibility, and it brings that's new types of challenges that someone that is working on a municipality or that is working on a region council or on a national government introduce. And some more, 2 or 3 more points which are very important. On the other hand, we are no longer working in terms of uncertainty. Climate change local impacts are not uncertain. They are what I used to say, uncertain. Because we know that they might happen in a certain way, but we are not sure, and so we are only confronted with possible scenarios in different time horizons that we are not used to work with. And again, the construction of an ethic of climate change is very urgent, but very difficult when you work on disciplines that have to deal with territory. Third message, I would say, it's about, I ended up by saying that this message, it's the political message. I think that's a lot of hypocrisy and in all levels about, sincerely, about the politics surrounding climate change.
So hopefully your position in the city council will
No, I will be next week with the mayor of Lisbon, and then we'll point out some things about the adaptation plan for the metropolitan region that was presented today. That in fact is only a diagnosis. It has no effect, not a single practical measure to be put in place tomorrow. And why? Because there's no economy, no technology, and they cannot say to some promoters or to some people that are living on areas that might be affected, that they may change. You cannot discuss, or you should discuss, but there's not happening today the discussion, for instance, about a new airport. It's not about do we need or do we not need a new airport. We need a new airport, because the economy in Lisbon is growing. It's the airport of Lisbon is exceeding this capacity today, but we are not discussing, for instance, what level is the ground at the area of Montijo. We are not discussing that at the level of the ground at the airport of Montijo, the United States Army has an official document that doesn't allow the Navy to build any new infrastructure at below the 5.0 level. The adaptation plan for San Francisco has identified the San Francisco 3 international airports. I will close. Have identified the 3 international San Francisco airports as probably flooded in 2100, and so they have new orientations for future airports. And you are doing one in Montijo in that reality. So there's real things to discuss about climate change. But we are not discussing these things. We are pointing out agendas to 2015, where none of us will going to be seated in the chair, and we are making huge parties and capital of this and capital of that, but we are not really addressing what we can address.
Professor Brugnoli, you wanted to say something?
Well, I have a comment, but not on the Lisbon airport.
Which is fine. we don't mind.
Yeah, my comment is about, a paradox that has been, flooding among us. The paradox is that actually until recently, only 20% of the Earth population has been causing climate change and developing at the rate that we are living. So the paradox is that the other 80% is now growing, and they want to arrive at the same level of development that we are. And we cannot say you cannot, of course.
It's true, but my question here is like,
Yeah,
is it really necessary for them to go through the mistakes that the more developed ones have been, rather than using the technology that is already available to make a leap into
the paradox is political, because referring to, for instance, the availability of technology and science, of course, science has to progress because we know many things and we still have a few uncertainty that we have to develop more knowledge. But the technology will be available, I mean, to reduce fossil fuel and to cut and to go on. But the real problem that they're discussing in Madrid today is who has to take charge of the cost of all of this. I mean, the developing countries, they're claiming you developed at a certain cost, which is very cheap because of fossil fuel. Now we can develop with solar cells or with other things, which is more expensive. Who's covering this cost? So this is an international level of a problem that developed country has to take care of some of these problems. And of course, I mean, we have been discussing before about people moving or forced to moving or thinking about moving. But the small island in the Pacific Ocean, they are forced to move because the islands are flooded already. And so this is, I mean, something which is present in our political level. So the political level is this, in my opinion, which is impeding, actually, that cutting. So if we don't take care of this, and it's not just the cost. I mean, my colleague close to me mentioned that there is also a competitiveness of industries, of course, because if we allow somebody to develop at a cheaper rate, then it's a problem of economy. And so it's a complex political problem, in my opinion, more than scientific or technological, because the technology is there and the science base is there. We know that what is changing, and we need to change it very fast, because as Martin said, I mean, the rate of change is unprecedented. I mean, we doing something that happened in the past, but at a rate which is much faster. And the other complex problem is we cannot probably survive with our civilization at that rate, but also organisms. I mean, they actually adapted to the slower rate, but they have no time probably to adapt and to change at this rate. So we causing huge biodiversity loss because of this, because of the fast rate of change.
It's a natural selection that happens
the natural selection doesn't happen at this rate.
No.